Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited for this conversation. As you and I know, the actuarial market is so competitive right now, and there are so many exciting opportunities for actuaries. But navigating this territory can feel a little bit daunting and overwhelming for folks, especially if you're fresh out of college, finding your first job, or you've only ever worked at one company. So I'm just so excited to be able to demystify the job search process. But before we get into the juicy details, can you just take a moment to introduce yourself, share, where are you currently working, and how long have you been in actuarial recruiting?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Lauren, Vice President here at Selby Jennings. I actually head up the property and casualty actuarial recruitment space. So I've been doing this for probably about 4 years now. So watched a lot of different things, the market turn around to this crazy market, it's in now. I love it.
Awesome. Well, let's start by just addressing the elephant in the room. Sometimes you can be approached by a recruiter and you're not in a position where you're actively seeking employment elsewhere. And honestly, it can feel like a little bit of an awkward situation. So how would you recommend candidates respond and engage in those types of situations?
I think people sometimes are just a little bit nervous. They don't really know much about what the pros of using a recruiter. And so I think it's just the hesitation of the unknown. So it definitely is good to build those relationships with recruiters. You never know when you might need one. But also a lot of candidates that we worked with, I've worked with, I've never worked with a recruiter before. They're like, oh, wow, I wish I would have worked with them on my first job move. And I was like, yeah, I think it's worth, having that conversation because you never know what opportunities we might have or things like that. Because a lot of times companies work with us directly to go out and find, people that kind of have the background they're looking for. And it could be, your dream job and you just have no idea because a lot of these really particular opportunities are not posted everywhere. I think it's always good to know just because you also never know when something might change and you might need help in finding a new job.
Absolutely. And I think your point about the fact that some openings are just not publicly shared and you may not encounter it unless you're working with a particular recruiter that's trying to fill that position. I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind. For those that aren't familiar with the process or haven't worked with a recruiter before, can you at a high level kind of walk through what you guys actually do and again, sort of the benefits you see of that versus trying to kind of seek out a job on your own?
Definitely. So basically, we like to do an initial call, kind of go over your background, take a really take the time to understand your background, what your motivations are, what's important to you, what your dream role is. From there, it really helps, to have an updated copy of your resume, which I do think everyone should have on file just in general. You never know when there's opportunities. Usually it comes when you're least expecting it. From there, we use the copy of your resume, to show and talk about your background to our client. Obviously, if there's, interest on there, and we'll guide you through the interview process, which would be, kind of prep you for these phone calls, give you inside details that you wouldn't know by applying in on your own. We may know different things they might ask, or oh, this person's a little bit more tough, expect XYZ, rather than just going in blind, having no idea. Then also when it gets to offer stage, we're able to, money does, can rub people the wrong way. That's probably the most uncomfortable part of the entire negotiations. So we're able to, be that middleman, try to, we know when to push and with these clients, when not, when it's, what the market is and things like that to obviously get you the best offer possible, because we do have your best interest at the end of the day. I think sometimes people think, oh, that we're against them. It's no, we want to get you the most money possible. We're on the same team as you here, but yeah. I'm also us here, we're very transparent as well. I'm just not gonna mislead expectations. If you have let's say a trip planned, some PTO, but you're about to start, you want to accept, but you don't have those days yet, we're able to, make sure you're able to get that approved so you have it off. Negotiate on title or just different things like that, that may be important to the individual. But since it keeps the person and the candidate in the best light possible. So, I think it's a lot easier just because we also know a lot about the company from the back end. So we're able to be like, oh, I may already know the answer to your question.
Thank you for that answer. I think I kind of see like two major benefits on both sides. So it sounds like, one major benefit is that you have sort of like an advocate, somebody on your team who is kind of selling you to the company, but then you also have this interpreter between you and the company to help position you to be as competitive as possible when you're interviewing and in those negotiation stages. So yeah, thank you for diving into the details. I think related to this, something that at least personally I've experienced and I think other candidates struggle with is there's a little bit of nervousness engaging with a recruiter because there's sort of this thought of like, well, I don't want my current employer to find out. Like, that would be horrible.
Yeah.
And so can you just dive into a little bit of the protocols that you guys go through to maintain privacy of the candidates that you're working with?
So here at Selby Jennings, and like I can't speak for every firm, but here for sure we have like a lot of very like strict policies. Like we're not going to be sending your resume out without your permission. That's where people I think have heard horror stories maybe where they're like, oh, my boss got my resume because a recruiter like sent it to my, or things like that. We definitely don't do that, but I would say that like I think sometimes people just get nervous in general, like having those conversations, even if it's initial chat. But I think those conversations are good to be had with the company, even you decide you're not interested after, because you're not gonna know, and that's gonna help really like help you identify what you want, and you may have never even realized, oh, that's an option or things like that if you didn't speak to a company. Like I've had candidates where like their client is the person they're interviewing at, so their like manager does like know the person that they're interviewing with, but it is very confidential. And I think people don't realize like if they really want you, they're definitely not going to tell your manager, because like that's obviously going to just like shoot them in the foot right there. So I'm like, I think people get a little nervous because it's like, oh, they know each other, but it's like, no, they keep it really like professional as well. And I definitely get it. There probably has been times where that has happened, but normally it really doesn't.
I mean, as you mentioned, you and your company, you guys have really high standards, and that's fantastic. But the reality is not everyone does. And so are there red flags or things that candidates can kind of be on the lookout for when they're engaging with recruiters at different companies to kind of give them a sense for like, okay, this doesn't seem quite right. Like maybe I should just get out of this relationship. I guess, are there any things to look out for from your perspective that you're like, okay, candidates should expect this, but they're seeing this and that's not great?
I would say just like in the first call you have with the recruiter you're working with would be just be as transparent as possible. Like, because like the only way that we're able to help you is by knowing everything that like you care about or things like that. So if you're like, and I do think it's worth to say up front as well, like for the people that are very nervous about their boss find out. I know not everybody is, but if that's something you do have a concern with, I would bring it up on the first call. Be like, I want this to be very confidential. I don't want my resume going out anywhere without my permission, just because every firm is very different. Ours, obviously, that's just a standard procedure. We're not going to send your resume out, but can't speak for everyone. But I think just managing those expectations on the first call of what you want out of the relationship, and the recruiter can talk about it as well, just so that everyone's on the same page. And that's, I think, how you have the most successful relationship with the recruiter. Because the only way, that you can be helped is by like letting us know what we can do to help you. So, because that's the goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, setting those expectations up front, being very clear about, your intentions is so important. And then I think it's also, I don't know, I've certainly had this feeling of like, almost guilt of like, you don't want to like waste somebody's time if you're not really even seriously looking. And so can you just reassure candidates that like, if they engage in a conversation with a recruiter, just as for like an exploratory conversation, they're not committing to anything, right? Like how is that perceived from your perspective?
We very much encourage to have those initial conversations. The thing is, you really don't know about the company or the job without having an exploratory conversation. And a lot of times job descriptions are like, not really accurate of what the role may be, just because they are made by someone, who is in talent acquisition that is not an actuary. So like someone who's not an actuary writing an actuarial like job description, there could be a lot of like miscommunication in there. So I definitely think it's good to have those conversations. People don't expect you to be, it's not like you're making the move tomorrow, like you're having to accept a job offer. People do understand, like after those calls, maybe this is not the opportunity for you. And I think it's a little bit different. Like if you go through an 8-round interview process and then you're like, I don't want this anymore, and don't really have an excuse, like it's not like, the offer wasn't what you're looking for, things like that. That's when I think companies get a little upset, because then you're actually wasted multiple people's time. But having that first like exploratory conversation to learn about the role, company, things like that, basically, that's how you're going to know about the opportunity. And there's no harm in that.
Actually, one thing you just said reminded me of an experience that was recently shared with me by a colleague that I'd love your thoughts on. So you mentioned that, a recruiter is not necessarily going to be like rushing you into things. They're not expecting you to like accept an offer tomorrow when you just first have that conversation.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there have been situations where, you're applying for a job somewhere and the company you're applying with is like really gung-ho, like rushing the process as fast as they possibly can. And I certainly understand there are situations where you want to fill a role as efficiently as you can. But does that strike you as like a red flag? And are there, I guess, what kind of questions and how would you navigate a situation where a candidate and possibly you as well as the recruiter are feeling really, really pressured to move quicker than maybe you're comfortable with?
Yes. So what I would say, few years ago, when the like probably pre-pandemic, things like that, when our market was different, someone's moving that fast, and like maybe that would be more of a situation where it's like, oh, like I wonder what the situation is. Has this job been open for a long time? Like what's kind of the situation? I would say now, just because any good candidate is most likely in like probably 5 interview processes. So if you actually really are serious and like the person, that you do need to move pretty quickly. Doesn't mean it needs to be in 2 days, but like probably in like a week or so. Like so like I would say in the past probably, but now I think it's a good thing. I do think it shows like with this market, like they're actually serious about you, rather than like, you have one interview and then 2 weeks later you have the second round. Like everyone's going to have multiple offers by then.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I actually want to back up to something you said earlier around, I think you said candidates typically are applying with 5 different companies at the same time. Is that correct?
Yeah, almost all the candidates we work with will be in like multiple interview processes.
Okay.
So obviously like that is a little difficult to get things lined up, because obviously you want to try to get it all timelined out so you can have as many options as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear, because I personally have also felt the guilt of like, oh, well, if I'm interviewing with this one company, like, I don't know, I just feel weird about interviewing other places. Like, how are they going to feel? And I think it's important to recognize that that's very normal. And there's nothing wrong with, if there's one opportunity that you're just super, super excited about, and that's the only one that excites you, like, that's totally fine to just apply and pursue one. But the general, reality is that most people are talking to a lot of different companies, and that's just expected. And so there's no need to feel any like guilt around that specifically.
At the end of the day, you have to do what's best for you in your career. An opportunity is going to, you're not going to get that in your current role. You can't feel bad, about leaving, because, I've had managers tell people, I would do the same thing if I was in your shoes too. And like, it is a true thing, just because like you have to look out for yourself at the end of the day. Just because like if you don't, who else will? Outside of your recruiter. So
absolutely. No, I'm a huge supporter of advocating for yourself, and I love that the recruiting relationship allows you to have an advocate with you as well. So that's fantastic. One other thing I just thought of that I think might be helpful for people to fully understand the recruiting relationship is, how are you guys compensated? Because I think that there is maybe the hesitancy stems from too, like, oh, well, I don't want to be paying for a recruiter. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the candidates are never the ones paying, and it's companies coming to you guys saying, hey, we've got this role, and if you fill it, you are compensated. So how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's exactly how it works. You hit it spot on. Yeah, I think because I've had candidates be like, so do I like owe you money? And I'm like, oh, absolutely not. No. I'm like, no, it's completely free for you. And I think that's something that people, don't know. And it's like, that's why you should definitely utilize a recruiter. You have someone advocating on your behalf for free. and,
Yeah.
giving you inside information, guiding you through process, giving you tips,
Mhm.
helping you whether than like, from someone that's completely specialized and knows like the best way to go about the recruiting market and interview process. Basically, how it works is, if you are going to get a job and you accept it, it doesn't come out of your salary either, because some people do have that question like, oh, is this going to come out of my first year's salary? It's like, no, it is
Wow.
additional payment on top of um, the your yearly salary. So a lot of times when people are like, I'm worried if this company, this is another question comes up. I'm worried if this company, like is financially stable. And I tell people is like they would not be working with us if they were not financially stable, or they could not pay you, because like they have to pay us on top of paying you
Mhm.
whatever your total compensation of your offer is. If a company is working with external agencies, one, they really do care about getting top tier talent,
Mhm.
and they are financially stable.
So now I kind of want to pivot to more of like the practical side of things, and let's talk through some interviews, some resume tips, and ways to navigate that negotiation process that you referenced earlier. So first and foremost, as you talked about at the beginning, one of the initial steps when you engage with a recruiter is updating your resume. So what are some of your best tips for candidates as they are either creating a resume for the first time or updating it for a job offer or a job opportunity that they're pursuing?
Sometimes people don't make it very clear on their resume, but like obviously actuarial exams are very important. Also, you take all this time, money, time, studying, and things like that. So it is a very big accomplishment, and that should be something highlighted, I think, kind of on the first page before your employment, just because
Yeah.
like that's important, and most people are looking for that. Oh, everybody wants someone who is like, actively, going through the exams, looking to get their ACAS, looking to get their FCAS, and in a timely manner.
Mhm.
So I definitely think that's something that people don't highlight enough. And then I would say at least for every job, I think some people don't. They'll put like one or two bullet points. It's like definitely give like I would say 6 to 8
Mhm.
for each, at least
For
six.
each job?
Just
Okay.
because like then you can explain what you did. Obviously, if you've done any volunteer work, you're a part of any club, part of different things that like your employer, probably put that on there. Everyone
Yeah.
likes, someone who's involved and invested, because culture is a big part when getting like
Yeah.
a new job. Like you want to get the right culture fit, and that is something that like the clients really look out for as well.
So kind of what I'm hearing from you is that, you want to be specific about what do you actually do in your current role. And one other thing I've actually heard, in addition to just describing your day-to-day job responsibilities, is also talking about your results and what you've accomplished. And
Yes.
then adding to that, like you said, the view of you as a well-rounded person and what are things that you're passionate about outside of work, because then that gets to sort of that cultural element that you described.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, just keeping everything, clean cut, organized, very cohesive.
Mhm.
Like just have it all formatted correctly and have it very clear of like how long you did each job. Like, did you start November 2019 and you're still there presently?
Okay, so the next question I want to dive into is how to prepare for interviews. I think these can be so intimidating, no matter the skill level or the experience for the candidate. So what are your best tips for how to interview well?
One of the biggest things clients say is like, this like if they have negative feedback is this person has no idea anything about the company. So definitely look up the company, see what if they've had anything happen recently in the market, like review them, know what they do. Just so when the client's like, are you familiar with us? Even if you weren't familiar with them before, you always want to put your best foot forward. So
Yeah.
definitely review the company website, look into who you are speaking to as well,
Mm.
know a little bit about them, be ready to have examples for potential questions, and then also make sure to ask questions at the end pertaining to the company, the role, the team, things like that, to show you're engaged. Even if it's not for
Absolutely.
you at the end of the call, I think, you never know down the line if you might want to work there.
Mm.
They might work at a different company that you're wanting to get hired for. So you just never know. So it's always good to, show and like that you're engaged, be excited about it on the call. But yeah.
Absolutely. No, that's all fantastic advice. I definitely agree with everything you just shared. So now we get to the exciting part where it's, you've received a job offer from this company that you're really looking forward to working for. And now you have to sort of negotiate or navigate conversations around salary and benefits and all the details of your job offer. So what advice do you have for candidates when they're going through that process, and how can you as a recruiter support them in that?
Definitely when it gets to like close to offer stage, like if you just completed a final round, you need to reach out to your recruiter immediately. You need to tell them how you feel, just because a company, I don't think people realize there's a lot of things that do go into offers. So a lot of signatures, a lot of different, they meet with comp teams, things like that. And so a company doesn't want to put all this work in if you know you're not going to take it no matter what. So first off, I think the first thing you should do after that is debrief with your recruiter. Let them know how you're feeling, what hesitations or questions that you have, because like maybe they're able to talk. I know a lot of people like feel a lot better after we talk it out, just because there are things that I might know that like give more insight, but definitely, let them know the salary, that you're looking for. And then also like, I like to talk when I talk to candidates, it's like, so sometimes clients have asked us, this is this crazy market, and I've been seeing it more and more. We really want this person. What is the number that we can give them that they will pull out of other processes, and give a verbal acceptance? We have been seeing that more recently. So if you know that's your top choice, you definitely should have a number. We ask every call, what are your expectations? You don't know if this person's got a promotion, a raise, things like that. A lot of things can happen in the interview process. So I think being transparent the whole time, what you're looking for, and then at the end, not trying to like switch it up a ton unless you have good, valid reasoning behind it.
Last but not least, another potential awkward conversation is, of course, the one that you have to your current boss and employer about the job change you're about to embark on. And so what are your thoughts and advice around how to best navigate those conversations with your current employer?
Yeah, I would say definitely a big pro of working with a recruiter is they're able to really guide you through that. These are conversations. Unfortunately, like they're not fun conversations. It's probably the worst part, I think, is because everyone gets so stressed. I mean, I probably would get a little nervous if I was doing that too. It's a human nature thing. It's uncomfortable, but unfortunately, these conversations, like, have to be had. But basically, I think a lot of people don't know is you don't have to tell them that much information. You don't need to tell them where you're going. You don't need to tell them, your new salary or things like that. I think people think you have to. Legally, you do not have to. And I think the more vague you are, the better. Just because when you start bringing up that stuff, it does get a little bit more messy. So I think just like, keeping it very vague. And then also, I do think one thing that a lot of people do say is very helpful and goes well is like, thanking your manager for what they've done with you to get you to that point, acknowledging that they've done a lot for you. They've helped you get to where you are, but like you need to make this move for you. A lot of times managers will be like, well, I would be doing the same as you. So I totally understand if I was in your shoes. And I think that's where people feel guilty and they don't think about is like, your manager really would probably be doing the same thing at the same time. And I've had multiple people say it, but I do think it like makes it go less messy. And also what we always tell people is like, most people who do accept counter offers, it may sound like a good idea, but in the end of the day, you're not going to have the same relationship with your manager. Like they're going to always, have in the back of their mind, are they looking? Like, the trust is gone. Probably more awkward. So I think it's better at that point. If you've already committed to a new job, you probably should just move there. I've had candidates come back to me that have accepted counter offers 2 months later being like, I actually messed up. I really want that opportunity, but that opportunity is off the table. At that point, they found another candidate. You don't have the same relationship with the company anymore because like that's not a good look when, joining. So I definitely think, with all of that, the vaguer, the better. It just really helps in kind of shutting that down. And then obviously then you're leaving on a professional note. So if you do want to go back to that company later on down the line, a few years later, you just never know that open door of communication still there.
That all makes a lot of sense. And, what I'm hearing from you is at the end of the day, you just want to approach that as respectfully as possible. You never want to burn any bridges. You don't know what opportunities could present themselves in the future, but you've also got to advocate for what is best for you and stand your ground. And don't assume the worst. Like, it's very possible that your manager could be very happy and supportive for you. And while there is the chance that they aren't as excited, like you don't want to just assume worst case scenario. So one last thing that popped into my mind before we wrap up that I think will be on a lot of candidates' minds, and just something that, as you're going into seeking out a new opportunity or navigating conversations around compensation is, how do you know how much you're worth, right? What is your advice or thoughts around how does a candidate know how much salary or benefits that is reasonable for them, and what is it based on, whether that's exams or years of experience or other things like that?
Yeah, so this is one that's been a little tricky, I would say, for a lot of people. Now that candidates are coming out of college, they graduate, they probably have some of them have 4 exams passed. People will get an ACAS designation in a year, which is really, really fast and crazy.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, which is amazing and great, but also it is hard for the employer just because you don't have that much work experience, but you have the designation. So how do you pay? So that's something people are trying to figure out. You're in a year to 3 years of experience, depending on your exams, you could be from 75 to probably 100. It really just depends. So I probably don't have the best answer because I think there's just so many things that go into that.
Yeah, no question. There's definitely a lot of different elements. And fortunately, as actuaries, we do have a lot of publicly available resources to kind of give us a sense for, what we should be compensated. However, I think one additional benefit of working with a recruiter like yourself is that you guys can then take that information and say, here's what I'm actually seeing in reality with the people that I'm placing, and let me help you understand what is realistic and reasonable, given these numbers and other data too. So it helps sort of interpret and kind of put it in context as well, it sounds like.
Definitely. On the first call I have when we're going over your background, what you're looking for, things like that, I like to, kind of just be really upfront with it, just because I think it's good to manage expectations on the first call, especially with compensation, because usually at the end of the day, when offer stage comes, that's the one that's probably the more difficult one to deal with. So it's easier if you have that open line of communication at the beginning, just because it will help it go smoother at the end.
Well, thank you, Lauren, so much for chatting with me. This was a lot of fun, and I feel like so many people are going to get value from hearing your perspective and just a little bit more insight into the interviewing and, recruiting world. What is the best way for people to either get a hold of you or Selby Jennings if they have other questions in the future?
So everyone at Selby Jennings, we have our email and our phone number on our LinkedIn profiles. So we're very easy to contact. Feel free to add us on LinkedIn, message us, we will get back to you. And it is nice when people reach out. So it's okay, I know you're looking and stuff. So I'm not just calling you, seeing if you might be open. But yeah, we're very easy to get a hold of. When people are very excited about interviews and in a process, they will reach out to their recruiter a lot. Don't ever feel bad about it. But also know if you're probably not hearing an update, it's because the company hasn't got back to us. Because believe me, if you're getting an offer, I'm calling you. You have an interview, I'm definitely going to call you. So you don't have to worry. I'll let you know what I know. But I think sometimes people are just don't realize that. But never feel bad about reaching out. I'd rather someone reach out to me more than not. So if they have questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lauren. I'll make sure to include as much of this information in the show notes below as I can. Thanks again for your time, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.